Do I stand here?
Sure, yeah, it's gonna follow you around.
Hi, I'm Janet Bednarz, wife of the speaker today. And welcome to the Sunday morning forum at First Unitarian Universalist Church. I was just told that I need to introduce my husband, so I
Just
just,
back a little bit from the owl, so.
is this better?
Sorry about that.
Do I need to start again?
No.
No.
Okay, so Dan will introduce himself from this point, but it's an honor to be married to today's speaker. Let's give him a hand.
Well, after that, thank you. So it's nice to be here with you on this winter morning. Reminds me of winters when I grew up in Detroit. It'd be a typical winter. Am I situated properly or?
I think the owl needs to move. We're good.
Okay. So I'm going to talk to you today about what happened 36 years ago. And at that time, I was fortunate enough, I consider it a high point of my life. I was fortunate enough to be spending the academic year in Berlin in 1990. I had been there just for a quick visit to see where my family and I would be living when we came the following year. I was there in October of '89, 3 weeks before the wall opened, and at a party. Lots of Americans in Berlin. Some of you may know there's as many as 50,000 Americans in Berlin at any time, or English speakers, let's put it that way. We were at this party, and it was all a lot of the American community. And the topic of discussion was what's going on in East Germany. Erich Honecker, the elderly leader, and most of the leaders of East Germany were young men in World War II, and they escaped Hitler and went to Soviet Union, and Stalin then installed them as the government after the war. So I was at this party, and the topic was what's going on in East Germany, and Honecker had said in a speech, some of you may remember this, in 100 years, the wall will still be there. Okay. And the consensus of the group was, yes, it will, in all likelihood, still be there. Change is very hard. And some of you may remember that during the mid-'80s, the consensus opinion of intellectuals in the West was there are the good guys and the bad guys. It's a Cold War, and we're in the doldrums, and we're stuck with that, and at least we're free and they're not free, all that stuff. There were only a few people in the West saying, you know, that's not really true. Something else is going on. There was a historian demographer in France named Emmanuel Todd. Anybody know that name? Okay. He was a young man at that time, and he studied, by chance, I heard him speak, just like I got in front of these intellectuals by chance. Someone said something to him about birth rates in the Soviet Union. And he looked up the birth rates, and they were declining. And then that got him, brilliant man, got him going. And he wrote a book, and he said, the Soviet Union cannot last. The Cold War is going to come to an end. And it took 15 years for his prediction, because he made that prediction back in the late 70s. Okay, so that's sort of the geopolitical context. Except one more thing. In 1990, beginning in '89, some of you will remember Hungary changed, the government in Hungary changed, and governments throughout Europe, Eastern Europe, on that side of the Iron Curtain, were rebelling against Soviet domination, and the Soviet Union wasn't doing anything about it. Because what was going on in the Soviet Union? You had Gorbachev, perestroika, and glasnost, right? Reform, openness. Okay, so in the fall of 1989, demonstrations began in Leipzig every Monday night. And I can remember listening to NPR, there would be the demonstrations and they would grow. Not much was going on in Berlin, where most of the intellectuals were. Most of the scientific academies were in Berlin, most of the intellectuals were in Berlin, and they were largely silent. By November, the groundswell in the country had grown to such an extent that some of the intellectuals felt emboldened, and there were major demonstrations going on in Berlin. Stasi, you all know Stasi, secret police, or agent I spoke to, he was a young man when I spoke to him. He said, we were in charge of controlling the population, and myself and some other young and other young colleagues went to the leaders who were again in their 70s and 80s, World War II vintage, and said, we can't control this. You'd have to send the army out against them. And we are pretty sure that if you give the order to shoot on East Germans, at least half of the East German army is not going to obey that order. They're just not going to do that. And the Stasi response and the government response was, it'll pass. Okay. So there was a demonstration around November 3rd or 4th in Berlin. And there was some repression. What I was told at Alexanderplatz, so most of you know where that is. That's the central part of the city. There's a world clock there. It's a famous location in Berlin. About 400,000 people, and the police were ordered to attack them. And what happened was, when the officers and higher ranking people were looking, the police would attack people. And then when they would move on, they would stop attacking people. And some would even say, oh, I'm sorry, because they had to go home to their families. Much like this ICE phenomenon that's going on here now with the masks, which I won't get into because I'm sure you all, that's a whole topic, but it's a similar dynamic. So that was about the 4th or 5th. The Stasi agent said to me, I knew then the government could not last. I started destroying files, and he did. And then the evening of October 9th, November 9th, I woke up. Some of you may remember this. Wake up in the morning, you put on NPR or CNN, because CNN was the only really cable news. And I saw people climbing all over the Berlin Wall. I saw people with sledgehammers, and the Berlin Wall has opened. So I had been there 3 weeks earlier. I thought, wow, okay. So that set in motion a string of events. And it was in keeping with the end of history. Some of you know that phrase, the end of history, and an article written by a man named Francis Fukuyama, who worked at the State Department. And he had the right argument at the right time. Turns out now it was the wrong argument, but that really doesn't matter. If you got the right argument that fits, the Germans call it zeitgeist, spirit of the times, you will become well known. And he was. He said the Cold War was ending. Communism had lost. Capitalism was victorious. The world would still have problems, but they would all be solved by the market. The market would solve everything. Yes, right. So here we are 36 years later. But at that time, I entertained the idea. I thought, could I have been wrong all this time? Not that I'm a Marxist, but not ideologically, but theoretically, I think Marx had a lot to say. So that was the geopolitical context. So I got there, skipping ahead, I got there in 1990, and to spend an academic year there. I was at the Social Science Center Berlin, and I went there to study how the introduction of personal computers would change the dynamics in organizations. And I got there and I realized, wow, this is really going to be difficult because my German's not very good. And was going to spend a good bit of time just trying to get access to organizations. So someone said to me, an American, listen, I've promised to go to the Academy of Sciences. There's an English language class. I promised I would speak there because they want to hear a speaker of American English. They're all trying to learn English now. This is the last class. I put it off and he was very busy and he said, I still don't have time. I've nominated you. And since I was staying at his apartment, because our apartment wasn't quite ready yet, I thought, that's great. So I got on the phone with this fellow in East Germany, speaking very formally to me here, doctor, professor, and all this stuff, the way they address people. And I went there and they had said Academy of Sciences. So I thought I was going to talk to a bunch of graduate students. And I walk in the room and there's people like older people, we should say, and younger people. And wow. So I had asked the man, what do you want me to talk about? He said, we're very much interested in the American Indians. They call it Ureinwohner, the original, okay. So I went in and started talking to them and they asked me about D. Brown's book, Wounded Knee, right? Buried my heart at Wounded Knee. And when I told them that the American Indians had just been given the vote, they were astounded. And so I told them about the situation with reservations and stuff. So we had a very good conversation. And afterwards, 4 or 5 of them came up to me and said, don't go anywhere. I want to be in touch with you. And they invited me. One invited me, you know, Sanssouci. It's Frederick the Great's, right? In Castle area, and it's a park in Potsdam, adjacent to Berlin. Oh, I give tours at Sanssouci. I'm an economist, but who wants a Marxist economist? So now I'm a tour guide. I'm going to take you on a tour. Okay. And someone said, I'm a philosopher. This was a woman. My husband has died. He was a very high party official. I live with my mother. And all these people, other people. And I thought, well, okay, I'll say yes. You know, a lot of times it's, yeah, I'll see you. I'll catch up with you, Lee, right? And nothing ever happens. It did. And then the teacher, she spoke perfect British English. Never been out of East Germany, but she listened, had a good ear, and she listened to the BBC every night. And she said, you know things that I don't know. They had asked me about Stevie Wonder. I just called to say I love you. And they say, why does he say from the bottom of my heart? What's in the bottom of your heart?
Bottom of my heart.
Difficult to explain idioms.
Song.
Moreover, I grew up in an ethnic enclave in Detroit. So they actually seemed like the elderly people I had grown up with in Detroit, in Hamtramck, actually. So the teacher said, will you come back to the class? Well, okay. So 2 weeks later, the next class, next two classes started, and I went. And yeah, coffee pause, they take a break, coffee break during the class. And they wanted to talk to me. And their standard line was, we're tired of talking to each other. The West Germans won't speak to us, or they treat us like children or dumbbells. Will you talk to us? We want to know about the wider world, the capitalist world. So then I went back to my colleagues at the Social Science Center in West Berlin. And I said, well, you know, this was one professor, Herr Dirkus. I said, Herr Dirkus, you know, can you put me in touch with whoever's studying the intellectual class of East Germany? I want to talk to that person and maybe I can make a small contribution. whatever. He said, there's nobody studying them. And I said, why not? He said, because they're the flotsam and jetsam of history. There's nothing to study. Do you want to do it? And I said, well, it's kind of interesting. He said, oh, I'd really love that if you would do it, because no West German's going to do it. That's absolutely impossible. And so I later found out, to speed along here, that the situation was that the intellectual class of East Germany was considered either naive, compromised, dumb, unintelligent, because West Germany had defined East Germany as an illegitimate state. Okay, so some of you remember Willy Brandt, Ostpolitik. Ostpolitik was, well, there's something there, and they think they're a state, but they're really feral children. The Soviets got a hold of them, and they're feral children. So Ostpolitik, let's pretend that they're not a state, and one day they will be absorbed into Greater Germany by West Germany. And that was exactly what was happening. So I started talking to these people. And so it's quite by chance, serendipity, we would say. So I've given you the geopolitical context, end of the Cold War, end of history. Communism is defeated. And as I laid out in the thing you saw in your emails, my questions revolved about, okay, what do these people make of their situation? They've been astounded. Their system has come to an end. They grew up believing the West was going to collapse, not them. So what do they make of this? Plus, I didn't know, and this is one of the reasons they all wanted to talk to me, most of them are going to lose their careers. They were, because when you take over a society, not that it happens every day, but one of the things you want to do is you want to crush the people who are essentially producing culture. The writers, the academics, okay? That's what you want to do. You don't want them to be subversive, and you certainly don't want to reward them. And moreover, the competition between East and West Germany was quite intense. Not quite, it was intense. I would say maybe 25% of West German academics and intellectuals felt brotherly and considerate of their East German colleagues. The rest had a bitter hatred of them and wanted to see them punished, ground down. And I had several. One West German, well, he wasn't West German, actually, he was Swiss, but he'd been living in West Germany for long. He said, when I met him, he said, what do you want to study these people for? They're finished. And his teeth, you know, maybe I imagine things. I said, they're finished, they're nothing. And I was having dinner with him. I thought, wow, let's get the coffee and dessert going here. Out of here. But that was what happened. All right, so, okay. East Germany had an Academy of Sciences built on the model of the Russian Academy of Sciences. 26 institutes, total number of people working there, 50, 60,000 people. Most of the institutes, I think 19 of them were in Berlin. They weren't all Academy members. Academy members was like being a tenured full professor, okay? They didn't teach. Their job was to do research. At these institutes, the variance in the quality of what was going on was quite pronounced. Some of them had world-class people working at them, like in economics, physics, what they call Kosmosforschung, is that it? Astronomy, okay, biological sciences, and some of them were just a few of the history ones and economic ones were not very good. They were, because in East Germany, everybody had a job. So when you got your degree, you were sent to an institute. And as one institute director told me, these people come here and I have to give them a job. He said, they may not fit, they may not want to work. I give them an office and I just let them be. Some directors had a militaristic mindset, were very controlling of what people did. Others let them back or something, or
Maybe somebody needs to mute.
oh, yeah, would everybody mute? Okay, so it was,
Keep moving, I don't see,
yeah, somebody needs to mute.
doesn't seem to be moving, the camera keeps moving.
That's the owl.
The camera keeps moving, is what she's saying.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll try and stand still. Okay, so, but the image, the stereotype in the West was they're all apparatchiks, they're all yes men, they're all corrupt, they have nothing to offer. So I talked with over 106 people, not just at the academy, but at Humboldt University, at the Berliner Ensemble Theater, which was founded by Bertolt Brecht, other people, Institute of Arts. And the main thing going on in terms of their identity was what happened. A few of them were doctrinaire communists, not that many, although I will note that there were some people who specifically, like in these classes, wouldn't even acknowledge my presence, just a few, because they thought I was sent there to spy on them by the West, CIA or whatever. They quickly found out, though, as the time went on in that fall of 1990, that they were of no interest to the West. So the academy and the universities were being evaluated. They call it Wissenschaftsrat. Rat means advice, Wissenschaft, science. So a science advisory council, which was supposed to be, according to the treaty signed between East and West Germany, was supposed to be composed of East and West Germans, and the academy would be evaluated. And 1/3 of all scientists and academics at the academy would be kept on, given jobs. 2/3 were to be dismissed. So it was a very, I think you could say, perfunctory situation. The people who survived were, in most cases, people who had what the Germans call vitamin B. That means the old boy network. They were part of the old boy network. And many highly qualified people, because of what they had written as East Germans, were simply not allowed to be given a job. There was also a process of, if you had had any contact with the secret police, the Stasi, you were automatically disqualified from getting a job. Well, that sounds good, but you didn't survive in East Germany. If the Stasi wanted to talk to you, you had to talk to them. So there were all these complicated things going on. But in the academy was closed at the end of 1992 and or 91, and about 1/3 of the people carried on. They were given contracts, though 3-year contracts, not like 10-year positions anyway. At Humboldt University, which is the flagship university of, it's like the Harvard of Berlin, it was completely taken over by West Germans, and there was a surplus of West German PhDs, just like here in the United States. And so most of the people who came to work at Humboldt and the other universities, they were from the West, people who couldn't have jobs. So that was quite it's quite complicated. But essentially, the dynamic going on, as some of the East Germans told me, was essentially what happened during what they call the Nazi times. You just get rid of the professors. That's what the Nazis did. You just dismiss people. Your services are no longer needed. Again, it just happens naturally that you want to control the ideological climate of intellectuals. Okay, so that's what happened. I'm going to go for just a few more minutes, and then I want to open it up for questions. I think there'll be a lot of questions. So I did go back in 2014, and Janet and I went back, and I found 25 of the original 100, which is pretty good. And I asked them, okay, you've been living in this system for 25 years, it was the 25th anniversary. What do you make of it? And to a person, they said, well, we really miss the life we had in the GDR, East Germany. I said, would you like to go back to it? Absolutely not. But I miss it. I had great memories. We had solidarity. This word kept coming up over and over. We had solidarity, and capitalism makes you competitive. It makes you, it destroys solidarity. One academic said, he said, I survived, but I've been getting 3-year contracts for 25 years. He said, looking back on it, I wish they had just dismissed me. I would have found another way to live, because I've been treated like a second-class citizen throughout my entire academic career here. And he said, I'm resentful. I'll be honest with you, I'm very resentful. I met another one. She said, I got very lucky. I was transferred to Potsdam, and the colleagues, they were West German. They were very nurturing and good to me. But she said, when I teach my classes, the sociology, she said, I have to watch what I say. My East German Weltanschauung is not appreciated by the higher ups. So
Or what is not appreciated?
It's worldview, or understanding
worldview, yeah, the worldview. And now, let me just sum up by saying, I can't really go into this. I will at the men's group in a couple months. Jim's asked me to talk to them. There's, how many of you know, Germany is in serious trouble right now. It's deindustrializing. The right-wing AfD, Alternative for Germany party, is probably the dominant party, probably has about 37–38%. In a multi-party system, that's a plurality. The right and the left impulses, that is parties for change, from what you have, Mr. Scholz, Mr. Merz, Angela Merkel, Ursula von der Leyen, is coming from the East. And that's because those people were never really integrated into united Germany. There's a left-wing impulse, but it's fairly weak. The left, well, left is almost always weak, because they offer these complex Marxist-based interpretations of society, and the right wing says, hey, see her skin's the wrong color, it's her fault. We eliminate her and people like her, everything is going to be great. So plus, last thing I'll say, the both parties, left and right, AfD and the left parties that have their core, their base in East Berlin or in East Germany, they want rapprochement with Russia. They say that's the future, if only because of energy. You can't run a society on American liquid natural gas. That's a whole other story, but that's what they believe. So the distrust of government fostered in East Germany is still alive. The final thing I'll say is several East Germans said this to me as they got to know me. They would say, you know, you guys are so naive. Don't you see you're being propagandized by your government? Don't you see that? It's just so obvious to us. So I hope I have given you an overview, and I want to leave at least 10 minutes here for questions, so please.
Thank you.
So I'm curious, Angela Merkel herself was
It
raised
was
in
East
East
Germany.
Germany, and she's also a scientist. I
Yeah.
think she was a physicist,
Yeah,
and yet she got to be chancellor of the
Yeah.
whole country. Did she help, or what is your view?
well, Angela Merkel was from a Protestant family. Her father, I think, was a minister.
Lutheran.
Lutheran. That made her different because the East German communists tended to be biased against Lutherans, anybody practicing religion. So you had to be pretty smart to get where she got to actually be admitted and allowed to go on. A lot of people were denied entrance to college because the party decided who went to college. So she was different, and she was a member of the East German CDU, the Conservative Party. When the wall came down, she immediately began going to West Berlin and volunteering at the CDU office. And that's how she rose through the ranks. I don't know if I'm answering your
No,
question.
so did she help in terms of the integration of scientists from East Germany?
No, I don't think so. She just left that behind. I interviewed people at her institute. I mean, it's entirely possible because they would sort of randomly assign people to me. I might have, had things turned out differently, interviewed her, but she was clearly West oriented long before. Look, the Lutherans in East Germany felt like a captive people, put it that way. Yes.
You have an item behind yourself.
Yes, yeah, I forgot about that. Oh. So this is a piece of the Berlin Wall, right near the Brandenburg Gate. I didn't want to get a piece of concrete, somebody could say, how do you know that's, how do I know that's from the Berlin? Well, this is.
I have a piece.
Okay, it's 13 feet high and reinforced with steel. It was designed to resist even tanks and tank shells smashing into it. Quite interesting. And this, anybody know what this is?
I remember.
Ampelmann. This is Ampelmann. This is for the cross signal when you can walk and when you should stop. But you see it's stylized. This is how the East German stoplights looked. The West Germans were kind of like we have, not very interesting. So it's very cute. This, and East Germans would say to me, this is the only piece of East German culture the West Germans allowed into the Unification. And everything else, innovations in healthcare, childcare, other things, education, were taken on, according to East Germans, by the West Germans, but no credit was given for that. Yes.
So you talked about the problem of the avant-garde Lutherans.
Yeah.
But communism itself is sort of a religious feeling. And my friends who grew up in communist China, they went through their transition, felt like they had believed so much in this idea, I work for you and you work for me. And then when they realized that they were naive, and that there were people who were more equal than them, who were enjoying the fruits of everybody's labor more than anybody else.
Yeah.
They felt this terrible sense of loss.
Yeah.
That they had lost this sort of deep feeling for the country, for how they were all together.
Solidarity.
Their solidarity, and the question is, was that the same kind of feeling that you
Yes.
could feel?
Yes, when I went back in 14, they would often say, solidarity was destroyed. You can't really have the solidarity we had in the West because the economic system demands individuals, in essence, competing against each other. They were accommodated to the West, but and they were reluctant to say their system was better because some of them said, well, our system failed, you know. So they would say things like, well, actually, both systems are pretty crappy. But see, when the wall came open, the intellectual class felt they had an opportunity to reform socialism, to create a third way, not Bill Clinton and Tony Blair third way, but a real third way. And from November until March 1st, when an election was held about unification, they had roundtables and they felt alive, that the future of East Germany was in their hands. Most of the intellectual class voted overwhelmingly to postpone unification for 5 years. Most of the workers and other people were fed up with East Germany, and they voted overwhelmingly for immediate unification. And then by December of that same year, most of the people in East Germany, workers, everyone, wanted to go back to the old system. Because they said, well, wait a minute, you mean I have to buy health insurance? You mean I have to buy auto insurance? You mean the government's not gonna provide these services, childcare, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's what it is. And a lot of the industry of East Germany was simply taken over by West German enterprises. Okay, and there were hundreds of thousands of people put out of work. The unemployment rate in what was East Germany is still higher to this day than it was than it is in the western part of Germany.
So I read a book in the mid-80s that I guess made it sort of unsurprising that the Cold War came to an end as, quickly as it did. There's a book, it's called Breaking Moscow by Shevchenko, I think, and he was the highest ranking Soviet to defect ever, I guess, at that point. And his book just paints the picture of a country just going through the motions that nobody believed in anymore.
Yeah, well,
I just wanted to, I'm sure you're aware of that. I just wondered what your thoughts were.
and that's why a large part of the reason, if not the fundamental reason, why East Germany failed, because the Soviet Union kept it afloat. Okay. And so when Gorbachev came along, that encouraged certain people in East Germany to say, he's our guy, he's gonna allow us. And there were many groups that sprung up in '89 to lobby for this, but they all thought the end result was a reformation of socialism and a union with the West Germans, and we're gonna teach the West Germans some things about what it means to have solidarity. They didn't realize that the West Germans were dominated by the Americans and the East Germans were dominated by the Soviets. If you, like one thing was pointed out to me, if you just walked around the rest of Berlin at that time, the way they spoke the language was very different. And the East Germans would say, I can't believe those West Germans, they use first names. And they say things like, fuck you, and asshole, and the word super was introduced, and all these things, and the East Germans were scandalized by this. They were, in a sense, living, I don't want to say living in the 1940s, but the West Germans were dominated by American culture and the East Germans were dominated by Soviet culture. Yeah. Yes,
Just a comment, my understanding is that East Germany was seen as the leading light of the Eastern Bloc.
it was.
Communist countries.
It was.
The bloc, and part of that I attributed just the diligence of Germans working to create good things, but it didn't meet the standards of the West, but.
Yeah, yes, you're right. It was considered upper echelon of Warsaw Pact nations. But, well, just things like, if you were in West Berlin and wanted to call East Berlin, there was something like 15 phone lines in existence. Okay, and so you could try all day long to get a line. You say, oh, I got a line to East Berlin, and you could call. The infrastructure of East Berlin was really decrepit. That's how they kept rents so low. But yes, it was considered upper echelon, but economically, maybe fine thing to say. If you ask East Germans why the Berlin Wall was built, they'll say, well, over two reasons. One, to keep people in, but also to keep Western capitalism out. Because the CIA and the British were doing, you could literally walk across the street and be in East or West Berlin. So they were doing things like with currency, West Berliners would live in East Berlin with incredibly cheap rents, buy food there. All these things, these economic changes. So it was done originally to hermetically seal the East Germans off from the evil, the depredations of capitalism. Okay, that's, I don't know what else to say.
I have a question.
Yes, okay.
We have plenty of time.
Yeah.
We can go to after 10.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I probably asked you this before, but when the wall went up, the propaganda here in the West was these families were torn apart.
Yeah.
What was the reality? Because you told me that people chose to live in East Germany, and was it predominantly like that feeling of families were torn apart, or?
Well, I think the statistic was something like either 1/3 or 1/2 of all East Germans had relatives in the West. And again, up until 1961, there was some sorting going on, especially after the war ended, Second World War. A lot of people moved to East Germany because that was the communist future, and people who were unhappy with the Soviets and communism, a lot of those people moved to the West. Many East Germans thought that the true Nazis moved to West Germany. And they would point and say, well, you see all those people, you see Ursula von der Leyen, her grandfather was a Nazi, and they point to things like this. So there was a lot of self-selection going on. But then with the wall, it happened so suddenly, people got trapped, and there were stories, like one man I knew, his daughter waded across one of the canals in Berlin, lots of canals, to get from east to west before the wall was completely sealed, and before they started shooting people.
Wow.
Yep. So I guess the war pretty much flattened Berlin. I mean, how would you compare the reconstruction in East and West after the war?
Well, yes, the center of Berlin, a lot of it was flattened. I was riding on the S-Bahn, the train, with one of my colleagues once coming into where Humboldt is, center of Berlin, cultural center, and I said, what are all those holes that look like bullet holes? He said, well, they're bullet holes. In the West, enormous amounts of resources were poured into West Berlin because it was a showcase city. Young men from West Germany, if they went to West Berlin, they were not subject to the draft, exempt from being drafted. Lots of things like that were done. And if you look at the difference then between East and West Berlin, it was stark, stunning. The glitter and glitz and glamour of West Berlin versus the barely reconstructed. Some things were reconstructed, but most of the places were not kept in good repair. They just, that's how the government, one, kept rents down, and they were always searching for money. They even sold, you know, I don't know if they're cobblestones, but they're these stones that you drive in to the sand to make a road. And East Germany was tearing up streets and selling the stones to West Berlin to get hard currency. Yeah. Yes.
So this is more of a comment. My daughter-in-law's older sister has been living in Germany maybe for 10, 15 years. She teaches English.
Yeah.
And she says there is a difference between, I don't know whether she's teaching some West Germans and some East Germans, but they're older. The older people are not as happy. You can tell how they dress. They're dressed in a different kind of clothing.
Yeah.
Or drab. But the same thing that you just said, the solidarity was actually, we were all suffering together.
Yeah.
And there was no disparity because everybody knew they had the same problems, the same complaints.
Yes.
And that bound people together. And now it's every man for himself.
Yeah.
And so this inequality of wealth is coming up
Yes.
and
Yes,
causing
that
a
is,
set of problems.
yeah, that's exactly how they felt. Also, this brings to mind, when the wall came down, capitalism really invaded East Germany, and drugs appeared, prostitutes appeared, crime appeared, and the English teacher I told you about, who could speak perfect British English, she said to me once, she said, how can your government live like that with these people who don't have any place to sleep? And you see these young girls, they were reporting them in from, I think the time Bosnia or Serbia or something. And she said, it's just appalling. Don't you understand that? And I said, yes. She said, well, yeah, you say yes, but nothing's done about it. And she said, at least nobody suffered that fate and another woman said to me, I could walk around Berlin, East Berlin, and she said, sometimes I'd go out in the middle of the night, just walk around. I never felt in danger. And she said, one time some man came up to her, he was drunk or something, and she just cried out, and 6 guys come running out of their apartment, chased them away. That so yeah, so it's very complicated, right? And they were driven together by their toward the end, by their disgust, fear, and loathing of the state. It brought them together. And that dream of socialism is what was destroyed when the wall came down. So the great irony is they thought, we finally got a chance. We're gonna have socialism with a human face. You remember that slogan? And it didn't happen. Did somebody do?
What do you describe this? What was going on in the transition time?
Yeah.
Sounds scarily like what's happening here now.
Yeah. How so?
putting down the intellectuals.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a purge. Like a purge.
This is a question just about the trade system. So we were talking about the obvious discrepancies between East and West, and the West moving into the East, and I would hope upgrading sort of certain things like the trains. I traveled from Nuremberg to Weimar in 2015. I took 4 different trains. And once the whole demarcation of East and West, once I got there, I was on, I almost got off and walked because the train seemed so decrepit.
Yeah.
I didn't have a place to sit, the seats were gone, and I found it very shocking. I thought there would be, one train line, one train that would get me to Weimar. There wasn't. And
Yeah.
did you have experience anything like that in 2014?
Well, we stayed in Berlin. We did go down to Dresden. Most of those discrepancies were no longer present as we were in Berlin. But yes, I know what you mean. The former states of East Germany have felt neglected all these years. For instance, when I got there, I was talking with one fellow, he's in politics. He's with Die Linke, the left party, and he's talking to me and he says, they never treated us properly. He said, the wage disparity, the 2/3 wage disparity. And I said, well, his name was Hanno. I said, Hanno, that was 30 years ago. He said, Dan, it's still in effect. So what this means is when the unification took place, the West Germans said, okay, those people who are doing jobs who former East Germans, this was in Berlin, as an example, the S-Bahn or the U-Bahn, or the bus drivers, S-Bahn, elevated train, and U-Bahn, the subways, person doing the same job, if you live in East Berlin, you get 2/3 the salary of the person living in West Berlin, okay? And that was supposed to be temporary. It was still in effect in 2014, 25 years later. And when we got back, I don't know how many of you watch Deutsche Welle News on Channel 13 sometimes. Well, anyway, Deutsche Welle, it's in English. And I'm sitting there one day, and this is 2014 or probably 15, I think, when the influx of migrants was coming. And they were interviewing a German woman in front of a building. And because the second year I was there, I lived in what had been East Berlin. I stayed on to continue my work. And I said, that woman standing in front of the apartment building I lived in. And so the interviewer said, why do you hate these immigrants? Thinking, well, I'm going to go talk to an East German. I hate these immigrants. And the woman said, I don't hate them. She said, they're being given all these things and I'm happy for them. But I've been working for 25 years. I'm ready to retire. And I've been working at 2/3 pay. She said, who's going to compensate me? Now I'm going into retirement. I have no way to be compensated for that. And it's affecting my life. So these disparities, if you look for them, they're all over the place. In other words, you know that.
And still,
Yeah, and still there. Still there.
so I had to look it up. As you know, one of the biggest problems facing all of Europe, not just Germany, is decreased birth rate.
Yeah.
For Germans. And there was a book we did in the forum about a German postdoc, Katharina König, talked about this book. I had to look it up. Deutschland schafft sich ab. How Germany does itself in. The idea that yes, workers were multiplying, sometimes second and third generation Turks.
Yeah.
Were still all speaking Turkish, not German. And then native German birth rate is going down. And I wonder whether that immigrant population was also an issue in the former East Germany. You know, there were Turks at West, you know, they came in.
Absolutely, the AFD, Alternative for Deutschland, Alternative for Germany. That party began when the European Union came into existence and the euro became the currency. And they had a very small support base. Their main issue was currency and sovereignty, which is really important. And their argument was, if a nation doesn't control its currency, it's no longer sovereign. But that didn't have any appeal to people. When did the AFD grow? In 2015, when Angela Merkel
That all the.
Wir schaffen das. Wir schaffen, we can do this. Wir schaffen das. We can do this. And 2 or 3 million came in. We have a friend, he's a meteorologist. He was East German, March for the Palestinians, you know, socialist. He's not with the AFD
Well, there
because
was
of
some,
this immigration issue.
there were some villages, I talked to Germans who say that, you know, you had a couple hundred people in a little village. And there'd be 1,000 immigrants
Yeah.
that came in all of a sudden,
Yeah,
because they had land and places where they could go.
Yeah.
So it was a huge.
yeah. So Merkel, I think it's fair to say Merkel basically forced this on the German public. And Merkel, in large part, created AFD with that decision. And then she left. She's, you know, from,
Does everyone here know what AFD is? Because
I said Alternative for Germany, I think.
so it's the right wing party.
It's the right wing party, yeah. Yeah. I've heard she's a nice lady. We have a friend, Petra, who shops in the same grocery store she shops in Berlin, and she sees Angela there, but Merkel is not well remembered by most politicians because of that and because of the Minsk I and Minsk II treaties. That also, won't get into that, but her duplicity dealing with Russia. But yeah, that's, I mean, maybe the right-wing party would have risen anyway, but that decision to just let all these people in, and I don't want to say shower them with resources, but give them resources.
Politically.
It created, it sowed the ground to create a Trump-like panic. See them there, they're coming in, like our friend said, is it time to stop?
No,
We're commenting on your shirt, Dan, and we like how the cuff is.
Oh, thanks, let's talk about that later.
So, another person.
I understand another person who was around East Germany at the time was Putin. And
He was
and so
working there.
I understand also that that kind of shaped him and what he's
Yes.
doing now. He thought the world ended when the wall came down, and especially when the Soviet Union ceased to exist.
Okay. Again, he was working in Berlin, he's fluent in German. He's got a lot of critics inside Russia who thinks, believe it or not, he's too pro-Western. And he's trying to integrate with the West over and over. Yeah, absolutely. That's what they believe. I'm telling you what they believe. And that well, anyway, that's a whole other topic. But the East Germans, if you talk to them, they are staunchly in favor of this rapprochement with Russia. And they see that as the future, because Germany is, because of the energy situation, is deindustrializing. Yeah. Anyone else?
So I just want to make a historical point, when we look forward here, we had a real major ruckus driving this book, I don't know if the notion was that the Turks were taking over. Germany.
I'm sorry.
There was a book, Germany does itself in, with the idea that the birth rate of the Germans was going down, and the Turks were coming up. And it was seen as a huge racist
Yeah,
sort of position,
yeah,
which didn't appeal to Unitarian thoughts. And the intention was not to promote it, it was just to say, this was an economist in Germany that had taken a position that this was
Yeah.
a real dangerous situation for Germany. And it almost tore form apart, it almost tore this church apart. It was horrible.
yeah.
It
It
was
can,
horrible.
when was that?
This would have been maybe 2010, 2011.
Yeah.
Trying to read over the church over there.
Yeah, and to get us out of here, we had to go over to the, in other words, there was this internal sort of concern about how un-American or this notion was, but it was the most popular book in Germany at the time.
Yeah, well, probably in East Germany. Yeah.
He's not sure.
And so that is just fodder for well, for racism, for panicking people. My friend, the guy's brilliant. He does the weather for Europe, you know. But you get him on this subject and it's just this is what's happening and you can't dissuade him. It's just what he believes, that the Muslims are taking over the country.
So we de-industrialized here in the US, they're trying to bring back industry. Germany are de-industrializing. What we supposedly replaced it with a knowledge economy. Is Germany doing that?
They're replacing it with what's called military Keynesianism. Spend a ton of money rearming, buying weapons, because they want to presumably attack Russia in 2027. That's,
What?
yeah.
What?
If you listen to
Maybe
it,
we should,
yeah, we should call it.
That's actually.
People would want them to stay, yeah, after. It's gonna.
When I was a medical student, I was in was a famous so excited.
It's actually.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.